The winter of 1887 in the Dakota Territory was one that old-timers would speak of for generations to come. It was the kind of cold that turned breath to ice and made even the wolves seek deeper shelter. But in this unforgiving landscape between the harsh elements and the complex tensions of a changing frontier, emerged a story of extraordinary compassion that would alter the course of history for two vastly different worlds. This is the remarkable true story of how one woman's decision to brave a blizzard led to a discovery that would test the limits of human empathy. 3 abandoned Lakota infants, barely clinging to life in the killing cold. Her choice to save them would spark a chain of events culminating in one of the most unexpected encounters the frontier had ever witnessed: the return of their father, a respected Lakota war chief, with 100 warriors at his back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Dakota Territory in January 1887 had fallen victim to what meteorologists would later call the White Hurricane. For 6 consecutive weeks, blizzards had pummeled the frontier with merciless precision, creating snowdrifts that swallowed entire settlements and temperatures that plunged to 40 degrees below zero. The railroad lines that connected the scattered homesteads to civilization had been rendered useless, buried beneath impenetrable walls of ice and snow. For Eleanor Blackwood, a 34-year-old widow struggling to maintain Whispering Pines, the small horse ranch she had built with her late husband James, this catastrophic winter threatened everything she had fought to preserve. Her husband's unexpected death from pneumonia 2 years prior had left her alone to manage the 20 acres of rolling hills and pine forest that had once been their shared dream. Another 2 of the fence posts have collapsed under the weight of the ice, Miss Eleanor, reported Samuel Tucker, her foreman and one of only 3 ranch hands who had remained after James died. The others had quietly departed, unable to imagine a woman succeeding in such an unforgiving business, especially one without children or family to support her ambitions. Eleanor pushed a strand of chestnut hair back under her wool cap as she studied the corral through the small window of her cabin office. At 34, her face held the quiet determination of someone who had weathered personal tragedy without surrendering to it. Fine lines had formed at the corners of her eyes, partly from squinting into the prairie sun, partly from the weight of solitary decision-making. "We'll reinforce them with the timber from the North Grove," she decided, making a notation in the ranch ledger. "The horses need that corral secure before the next storm hits." Samuel, a weathered man of 55 with a silver-streaked beard, and the calloused hands of someone who had spent his life working the land, nodded with respect. "Weather Service in Bismarck is saying another front's moving in by tomorrow night. Might be the worst one yet." Eleanor closed the ledger with a soft thud. "Then we'd better prepare. Have Matthew and Daniel bring extra feed to the barn. If this storm is as bad as they're predicting, we may not be able to reach the pasture for days." Life at Whispering Pines operated on Eleanor's practical efficiency. The small ranch specialized in breeding and training quarter horses known throughout the territory for their intelligence and endurance. What had begun as James's passion had become Eleanor's salvation, a focus that pulled her through the fog of grief and into a purpose that demanded every ounce of her attention and skill. The isolated ranch sat in a precarious location, the eastern edge of what many still considered Lakota territory, despite the government's increasing pressure to confine all native peoples to designated reservations. The past decade had seen violent clashes and broken treaties, culminating in the Great Sioux War and the tragic events at Wounded Knee just 7 years earlier. Though tensions had somewhat subsided in their immediate region, an uneasy peace prevailed, one built on mutual avoidance rather than understanding. Eleanor had never shared the open hostility many settlers harbored toward the Lakota and other tribes. James had taught her that respect transcended the boundaries of culture and language. They had occasionally traded with Lakota hunters who passed near their property, exchanging supplies for beautifully tanned hides or information about weather patterns. These interactions had been brief but cordial, built on the frontier necessity of pragmatic coexistence. Since James's death, however, such encounters had ceased. Whether from respect for her mourning or changing migration patterns as more natives were forced onto reservations, Eleanor hadn't seen a Lakota face in nearly 18 months. That evening, as twilight settled over the snow-blanketed landscape, Eleanor stood on her cabin porch, watching dark clouds building on the northwestern horizon. The impending storm cast an eerie green-purple light across the endless white, a color that experienced frontiers people recognized as nature's warning. "Got the horses secured, Miss Eleanor?" Matthew Hayes called as he trudged through knee-deep snow from the barn. At 23, he was the youngest of her hands, having arrived a year ago seeking work after his family's farm failed further east. "Daniel's checking the last of the fence line. Should be back before dark." Eleanor nodded, her eyes still fixed on the threatening clouds. "Make sure the emergency lanterns are filled and the stove wood is stacked by both doors. I don't want anyone stumbling around in the dark if this blizzard knocks out our visibility." "Yes, ma'am." Matthew hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to another. "Samuel says this one's likely to lock us in for at least 3 days. You sure we've got enough supplies?" Eleanor offered a reassuring smile. "We stocked up after the last one. There's plenty of salt pork, beans, and flour to see us through a week if necessary." Her confidence wasn't merely for Matthew's benefit. Preparation had become Eleanor's shield against disaster, both natural and personal. The temperature dropped precipitously as night fell, the cold so intense it seemed to crystallize the air itself. Eleanor added extra logs to the cabin's iron stove, watching through her frost-rimmed windows as the first fat snowflakes began to fall. The wind followed quickly, transforming the gentle descent into horizontal sheets of white that erased the boundaries between earth and sky. By midnight, the storm had evolved into the monster the Weather Service had predicted. The wind howled like a living creature, battering the cabin's sturdy logs and finding every minuscule gap in the chinking. Eleanor lay awake, listening to the familiar creaks and groans of her home, resisting nature's assault, mentally cataloguing repairs that would be needed when the weather broke. She had almost drifted into uneasy sleep when a sound cut through the storm's cacophony, something different from the wind's wail or the cracking of frost-stressed timber. Eleanor sat upright, straining to hear. There it came again, higher-pitched, almost like "A child?" she whispered, into the darkness, immediately dismissing the thought as imagination. The nearest neighbors with children were the Millers, over 12 miles away. No child could be out in this killing storm, but the sound came a third time, now unmistakably a thin, plaintive cry. Eleanor threw off her quilts and moved swiftly to the window facing east, toward the small creek that marked her property's boundary. Wiping condensation from the glass, she peered into the swirling white darkness. Nothing was visible beyond the barest outline of her barn, yet the cry came again, weaker now but distinct from the storm's roar. Doubt and reason warred with instinct. In Eleanor's mind, no one should venture out in a blizzard of this magnitude. It was frontier suicide. A person could become disoriented within seconds, freezing to death mere yards from safety, yet something, perhaps the same stubbornness that had kept her fighting for Whispering Pines when others insisted she sell, propelled Eleanor into action. She dressed rapidly, layering wool garments beneath her heaviest buffalo coat. Pulling on 2 pairs of socks and her fur-lined boots, she wrapped a long scarf around her head, leaving only her eyes exposed. The emergency lantern burned steadily. As she lifted it from its hook, Eleanor hesitated at the door, listening again. The cry had stopped, which triggered a new urgency. Silence in this cold meant only one thing. "I must be losing my mind," she muttered, securing a length of rope around her waist. The other end she tied firmly to the porch post, an old trapper's trick to find one's way back in whiteout conditions. Then, bracing herself, Eleanor pushed open the door and stepped into the full fury of the blizzard. The cold struck like a physical blow, instantly numbing any exposed skin. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet, and the swirling snow reduced. Her lantern's glow to a feeble bubble of light, extending barely an arm's length. Eleanor pulled her scarf tighter and leaned into the gale, following her instinct toward the eastern creek bed. Each step required tremendous effort, breaking through snow that had drifted above her knees. The rope played out behind her as she moved cautiously forward, counting her steps to maintain some sense of distance and direction in the disorienting whiteness. She had gone perhaps 50 yards when the cry came again, so close that Eleanor gasped in surprise. Sweeping her lantern in a careful arc, she spotted a dark shape against the snow, partially sheltered beneath a fallen pine bough. At first, the bundle appeared to be abandoned supplies, perhaps a traveler's pack lost in the storm. But as Eleanor knelt beside it, brushing away the accumulating snow, her lantern illuminated something that stopped her heart. A small, copper-skinned face, eyes closed, lips blue with cold. A Lakota infant, wrapped in a deteriorating buffalo hide. And not just one child. As Eleanor carefully turned back the frozen covering, she discovered 3 tiny forms huddled together. Triplets, no more than 6 months old, their small bodies, each sharing in a desperate bid for survival. "Dear God," Eleanor whispered, immediately setting down her lantern to check for signs of life. Disbelief mingled with horror at the idea of infants abandoned in such conditions. Who would leave children to die in a blizzard? Or had their caretaker collapsed nearby, another victim of the merciless storm? The infant's skin felt ice cold. But as Eleanor pressed her fingers gently against their necks, she detected faint pulses in all 3. They lived, but barely. Another hour in these conditions would have sealed their fate. Without hesitation, Eleanor unwrapped her own scarf and opened her coat. Gathering all 3 babies against her chest, she rewrapped her coat around them, using her body heat as their first defense against the killing cold. With her free hand, she grasped the guideline rope and began the arduous journey back to her. A cabin, each step now weighted with precious, fragile life. The return seemed to take hours, though in reality it was less than 10 minutes. By the time Eleanor pushed through her door, collapsing onto the cabin floor in exhaustion, the smallest of the triplets had begun to whimper, a sound that, despite its weakness, represented the most beautiful music Eleanor had heard in years. She moved swiftly to the stove, adding wood until the flames roared with renewed intensity. Only then did she carefully unwrap the buffalo hide to fully assess the 3 tiny lives she had discovered in the heart of the storm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor worked with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to frontier emergencies. She laid the triplets, 2 boys and a girl, on her bed, wrapping them in warmed blankets while keeping them near enough to share body heat. Their traditional Lakota clothing, though beautifully crafted from softened deerskin and decorated with intricate beadwork, had grown damp from snow and offered little protection against the brutal cold. "Hold on, little ones," Eleanor murmured, as she heated water on the stove. Her medical knowledge was limited to the practical skills all frontier settlers developed by necessity, setting bones, stitching wounds, treating fevers with herbal remedies. But hypothermia in infants required specialized care that went beyond her experience. Working from instinct and fragments of advice she'd heard from Dr. Wilson, the circuit physician who visited the region quarterly, Eleanor prepared warm compresses for the baby's chests and extremities. She knew better than to immerse their frozen limbs in hot water, a common but dangerous mistake that could send a hypothermic body into shock. The smallest boy, his face still carrying the blue tinge of severe cold, worried her most. His breathing came in shallow gasps, each one seemingly requiring tremendous effort. The other boy and the girl had begun to respond to the warmth, their limbs gradually softening from their frozen rigidity. But this one remained frighteningly still. "Come now, fight," she urged, gently massaging his tiny hands between her palms. "You've survived this long. Don't give up now." Outside, the blizzard intensified, rattling the cabin's windows with renewed fury. The wind's howl seemed to underscore the precariousness of the situation. 4 lives now isolated in a wooden sanctuary, surrounded by a killing landscape. Had Eleanor not heard their cries, had she dismissed the sound as imagination or wildlife, these children would already be lost beneath the snow. An hour passed in tense vigilance as Eleanor alternated between warming compresses and offering drops of water from a moistened cloth. She dared not attempt actual feeding until their bodies stabilized. The girl, who appeared to be the strongest of the 3, had begun to make small mewling sounds that Eleanor recognized as hunger. The larger boy had developed a flush of healthy pink returning to his copper cheeks, but the smallest one remained alarmingly still. "Miss Eleanor?" Samuel's voice called through the door, accompanied by a heavy knock. "Everything all right? Thought I heard noises from your cabin." Eleanor realized the ranch foreman must have been checking the animals in the nearby barn and noticed her lantern, still burning at this late hour. She hesitated only briefly before calling back. "Samuel, I need your help. Please come in." The older man entered in a swirl of snow and bitter cold, stamping his boots on the threshold before securing the door. Against the gale, his eyes widened as he took in the scene. 3 tiny forms bundled on Eleanor's bed and his employer's obvious distress. "Good Lord," he whispered, removing his hat as if in the presence of something sacred. "Where did they come from? How?" "I found them by the East Creek," Eleanor cut in, gesturing him closer. "The smallest one isn't responding as he should. I need you to ride to the Wilkerson place. Emily trained as a midwife before marrying John. She'll know better what to do." Samuel's weathered face creased with concern. "Miss Eleanor, nobody can ride in this storm. It's 3 miles to Wilkerson's, and there's no visibility. I'd never find my way." Eleanor knew he was right. Sending anyone out now would likely result in another tragedy. "Then you must help me here," she decided. "We need to raise this one's temperature gradually, and we'll need milk, warm goat's milk if possible." Without further question, Samuel moved to assist, his initial shock giving way to the prairie pragmatism that valued life over any other considerations. He headed back to the barn to milk one of the 2 goats they kept for emergencies, protected from the weather in a small corner stall. While he was gone, Eleanor continued her gentle ministrations, speaking softly to the triplets in a constant stream of encouragement. The girl had fully awakened now, her dark eyes studying Eleanor with an intensity that seemed beyond her infant months. The larger boy, too, had begun to stir, making small movements beneath the warmed blankets. "That's it," Eleanor coaxed. "Come back to us." When the smallest boy finally drew a deeper breath, his tiny chest rising more substantially than before, Eleanor felt tears spring unexpectedly to her eyes. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding her own breath until that moment. Samuel returned with a small container of fresh goat's milk, which Eleanor diluted slightly and warmed over the stove. "They can't be more than 6 months old," she observed, testing the temperature on her wrist. "Old enough for some solid foods, but milk will be safest for now, especially after what they've endured." Using a clean cloth twisted into a makeshift feeding wick, a technique she'd seen mothers use when proper bottles weren't available, Eleanor offered the milk first to the girl, who suckled eagerly. The larger boy accepted with equal enthusiasm. The smallest one managed only a few drops before falling into what now appeared to be natural sleep rather than cold-induced lethargy. Who would leave babies out in a storm like this? Samuel wondered. Aloud, his voice heavy with the unspoken implications. The nearest Lakota encampment was over 20 miles away, beyond Thunder Basin. And why 3? Triplets are rare enough, but to abandon them? Eleanor shook her head, unwilling to speculate without facts. We don't know they were abandoned. Their mother or father could be out there still. Though even as she said it, she knew the likelihood of any adult surviving hours in the current conditions was virtually non-existent. "I should wake Matthew and Daniel," Samuel suggested. "Once there's even a hint of daylight, we can search for—" "No," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "No one leaves shelter until this storm breaks. That's an order, Samuel. I won't risk losing good men to a blizzard like this." The foreman nodded reluctantly, understanding the wisdom in her command, even as his humanity rebelled against the thought of someone still struggling for life in the frozen landscape. As dawn approached, though no actual sunlight penetrated the thick, swirling snow, Eleanor made up a pallet near the stove where Samuel could rest. The triplets had stabilized enough that she felt confident in their immediate survival, though the smallest boy would need careful monitoring. "Get some sleep," she told her foreman. "When this weather breaks, we'll need clear heads to figure out what happens next." Samuel settled onto the makeshift bed, his concerned gaze still fixed on the 3 small bundles now sleeping on Eleanor's bed. "What will you do with them, Miss Eleanor, if no one comes?" It was the question Eleanor had been avoiding since the moment she discovered the infants in the snow. The frontier had strict, unwritten rules about such matters. Settlers looked after their own, while tribal affairs remained separate. Taking in Lakota children, even orphaned ones, would raise eyebrows and possibly create dangerous tensions. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," she replied, though in her heart a decision had already begun to form. For now they need warmth, food and rest. Tomorrow's problems can wait for tomorrow. As Samuel drifted into exhausted sleep, Eleanor kept vigil beside the triplets, studying their features with growing fascination. They were beautiful children, with high cheekbones and thick black hair. The boys were identical, save for their size, while the girl had slightly finer features and longer eyelashes that brushed against her cheeks as she dreamed. Eleanor found herself wondering about their parents. Had their mother died in childbirth, overwhelmed by the rare burden of triplets? Had the family been traveling when the storm struck, becoming separated in the whiteout conditions? Or was there a darker story, one of deliberate abandonment driven by desperation or superstition? Some tribes, she knew, considered multiple births unusual enough to inspire fear, but the Lakota generally celebrated twins, seeing them as spiritually significant. Would triplets be viewed differently? Eleanor's knowledge of Lakota culture was limited to what James had shared and what she'd gleaned from occasional trading interactions. The blizzard continued unabated throughout the morning, confining Eleanor and Samuel to the cabin, along with their 3 unexpected charges. Matthew and Daniel remained in the bunkhouse nearby, presumably wondering about the unusual activity they'd glimpsed at their employer's cabin, but unable to investigate in the dangerous conditions. By midday, All three infants had taken milk several times, their color improving with each feeding. The smallest boy, though still concerning, had begun responding more vigorously, his tiny hands grasping Eleanor's finger when she stroked his palm. "They need names, at least temporary ones," Samuel suggested as he prepared a simple stew from their provisions. "Can't just keep calling them the girl and the boys." Eleanor considered this as she rocked the smallest triplet in her arms. "This little fighter reminds me of my grandfather. Let's call him William for now." She glanced at the other two, peacefully sleeping on her bed. "The larger boy can be George, and the girl—" She paused, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. "Grace, after my mother." Samuel nodded approvingly, seemingly satisfied that providing names acknowledged the humanity of these small lives without overstepping boundaries that might need to be respected later. "William, George, and Grace," he repeated. "Good, strong names to help them through this storm." As if in response to his comment, little William opened his eyes fully for the first time. Dark, intelligent eyes that fixed on Eleanor's face with an intensity that startled her. In that moment, something shifted in Eleanor's heart, a connection forming that transcended the circumstances of their meeting or the differences in their origins. "Welcome to the world, William," she whispered, gently touching his cheek. "You're safe now." Outside, the blizzard finally began to ease, the howling wind gradually subsiding to a less threatening moan. Soon, Eleanor knew, decisions would need to be made, explanations given, consequences faced. But for now, in the warmth of her cabin with three miraculous lives cradled in safety, she allowed herself to exist solely in the present moment. One defined not by the divisions of the outside world, but by the simple, profound act of preserving life against impossible odds. By the third morning after Eleanor's discovery, the blizzard had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a transformed landscape of massive snowdrifts and crystalline silence. The temperature remained dangerously low, but the clearing skies allowed Matthew and Daniel to finally make their way from the bunkhouse to Eleanor's cabin, their curiosity about the unusual activities overcoming their respect for her privacy. Their astonishment at finding three Lakota infants being tended by their employer was matched only by the practical concerns that immediately followed. "Word's going to spread fast," Daniel Wells warned as he helped clear paths to the barn and corral. At 36, he was the most experienced horseman on the ranch, with a decade of frontier life shaping his perspective. "Miller's boy is due to ride through tomorrow with the mail. Once he sees those children, the whole territory will know." Within a week, Eleanor nodded, acknowledging the reality without surrendering to it. "I can't control what people say, Daniel. I can only control what I do." "And what exactly are you planning to do, Miss Eleanor?" Matthew asked, his younger face showing both concern and genuine curiosity. "Those are Lakota children. Their people might come looking for them." "I hope they do," Eleanor replied firmly. "If they have families searching for them, that would be the best outcome." The men exchanged glances that revealed their skepticism. Relations between settlers and the Lakota had improved from the open warfare of previous decades, but mutual suspicion remained the default position for most frontier communities. "And if no one comes?" Samuel asked quietly, voicing the question hanging in the cold air. Eleanor's gaze drifted toward her cabin, where the triplets now slept peacefully in a makeshift crib fashioned from a wooden grain box lined with soft blankets. "Then I'll do what needs doing," she answered simply, her tone brooking no further discussion. That afternoon, Eleanor sent Daniel to the Wilkersons' homestead with a carefully worded message requesting Emily Wilkerson's assistance with an urgent matter involving infant care. She deliberately omitted mentioning the triplets' Lakota heritage, knowing that such information might color the response or delay much-needed help. While they waited, Eleanor continued improvising care solutions. Feeding 3 infants simultaneously presented logistical challenges she'd never anticipated. Using clean rags as makeshift diapers, she established a rotation system that allowed her to attend to each child's needs while maintaining the others' comfort. Little William, the smallest triplet, continued to concern her. Though his condition had stabilized, he lacked the robust energy of his siblings. His breathing sometimes grew labored, and his appetite remained weaker. Eleanor found herself spending extra time cradling him, as if her will alone could strengthen his tenuous grip on life. "You're not giving up on me," she whispered, stroking his cheek as he dozed in her arms. "So I'm not giving up on you." By late afternoon, Emily Wilkerson arrived, riding alongside Daniel, her medical bag clutched firmly in gloved hands. At 42, Emily had delivered nearly every child born within 20 miles over the past 15 years, earning a reputation for both skill and discretion. Her reaction to the triplets was professional rather than judgmental, a fact that elevated Eleanor's opinion of her neighbor considerably. "Hypothermia in infants is tricky," Emily noted as she examined each child thoroughly. "You did well warming them gradually. Many would have made the mistake of using too much heat too quickly." "Will they recover completely?" Eleanor asked, her anxiety evident despite her efforts to maintain composure. Emily's examination of Grace and George yielded confident nods. "These two show no signs of lasting damage. Strong heartbeats, good color, responsive pupils." When she turned to William, however, her expression grew more guarded. "This little one." She listened to his chest with her stethoscope, her brow furrowing. "What is it?" Eleanor pressed. "There's a slight irregularity in his breathing, a crackling sound in the lungs that suggests the beginnings of pneumonia." Emily reached into her bag, removing several small bottles and packets. "I'll leave you with white willow bark extract for fever and a mustard plaster for his chest. Keep him slightly elevated when he sleeps, and make sure the air isn't too dry." As Emily packed her belongings to leave, she hesitated at the door. "Eleanor, I respect what you're doing, but you should know. John says there's been talk in Miller's Creek about Lakota war parties spotted near Thunder Basin." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter temperature. "War parties? Are they certain?" Emily shrugged. "Frontier talk is rarely certain about anything. But apparently, Jeremiah Foster claimed he saw a dozen warriors heading east 2 days before the blizzard hit. They were searching for something or someone. The implications hung in the air between them. If the Lakota search party had been tracking through the region when the blizzard struck, it could explain the triplets' presence near Eleanor's property. Perhaps their mother or father had been traveling with them, becoming separated or overwhelmed in the sudden whiteout conditions. "Thank you for telling me," Eleanor said quietly, "and thank you for your help with the children." After Emily departed, Eleanor shared this new information with Samuel, whose weathered face grew contemplative. "If there are Lakota searching, they'll have been delayed by the same storm that nearly claimed these little ones. Once the weather clears further, they might resume their search. Is that cause for concern?" Eleanor asked directly, knowing Samuel's opinion carried the weight of frontier experience. The foreman considered his response carefully. "Depends on the circumstances. If they're family looking for lost children, finding them safe here would be welcomed. If they believe we're responsible for separating them from their people..." He let the sentence hang unfinished. Eleanor understood the unspoken concern. Despite her personal views, she wasn't naive about frontier realities. Misunderstandings between cultures had sparked violence before, often with tragic results for all involved. "We should send Matthew to Miller's Creek tomorrow," she decided. "He can gather more information about these reported sightings while collecting our delayed supplies." That evening, As Eleanor sat beside the sleeping triplets, a new worry gnawed at her consciousness. She had acted on instinct, saving 3 lives without considering potential consequences. Now those consequences were beginning to materialize in the form of rumors and potential misunderstandings that could threaten everything she had built, and possibly the safety of her ranch hands as well. "What would you have done, James?" she whispered to the memory of her husband, a habit she'd developed in the years since his passing. In moments of uncertainty, imagining his counsel still brought her clarity. James had always believed in doing what was right, regardless of convention or convenience. He would have rescued those children without hesitation, just as she had. But he also would have recognized the complexity of the situation they now faced. Eleanor's musings were interrupted by William's sudden coughing, a harsh, wet sound that alarmed her with its intensity. She quickly lifted the smallest triplet, supporting him in the elevated position Emily had recommended, while patting his back gently. "Easy, little one," she soothed, as his tiny body shuddered with the effort of clearing his congested lungs. "Fight it off. You're stronger than you know." The episode passed after several tense minutes, leaving William exhausted but breathing more easily. Eleanor prepared a diluted dose of the willow bark extract, administering it with a patience born from the understanding that his recovery would require time and constant attention. As she settled back into her chair, the sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the night silence, a single rider moving at a deliberate pace toward the cabin. Eleanor tensed, instinctively moving to stand between the crib and the door. Samuel's voice called out from the porch, "Miss Eleanor, you should come see this." Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, Eleanor stepped outside, immediately noticing what had prompted Samuel's summons. In the moonlight, reflecting off the pristine snow, clear tracks were visible, approaching from the east. Not the single rider she'd heard, but evidence of multiple horses having passed near her property before the blizzard hit. "Daniel found these while checking the eastern fence line," Samuel explained, pointing to the partially snow-filled impressions. "They're 3 days old at least, preserved by the ice underneath the newer snow. Lakota ponies, by the look of the unshod prints." Eleanor studied the tracks with growing unease. "Heading which direction?" "That's the curious part," Samuel replied. "They circle around toward Thunder Basin, like they were searching in a pattern. These people knew what they were looking for, Miss Eleanor, or who." The implication was unmistakable. The triplets hadn't been abandoned, they had been lost, and someone had been systematically searching for them when the blizzard descended. "We need to establish contact," Eleanor decided. "If there are Lakota people looking for these children, they need to know the little ones are safe." Samuel's expression registered surprise mingled with respect. Many frontier settlers would have responded very differently to the possibility of Lakota warriors searching near their property. "How do you propose we do that?" he asked. "We don't exactly have friendly relations with any of the bands in this region." Eleanor considered the challenge. Direct approaches to Lakota encampments by white settlers were generally viewed with suspicion at best, hostility at worst. Yet allowing misconceptions to fester while the triplets' actual family potentially mourned their loss seemed equally untenable. "Thomas Running Fox," she said suddenly, remembering a name from years past. "He trades with settlements throughout the territory. James dealt with him several times, said he was fair-minded and respected among both his people and whites." Samuel nodded slowly. "I've heard of him. Works as an interpreter sometimes for the Indian Agency in Bismarck, but finding him could take weeks." "Then we'll start with what we can do immediately," Eleanor decided. "Tomorrow Matthew will go to Miller's Creek as planned. Along with our supplies, he'll inquire discreetly about Thomas's whereabouts. Daniel will ride north to the Richardson trading post. They might have information about any Lakota bands currently in the region. She paused, her gaze returning to the tracks barely visible in the moonlight. And we'll need to create a sign. A sign, Samuel echoed. Something visible from a distance that would have meaning to searching Lakota, but wouldn't attract unwanted attention from passing settlers. Eleanor's mind worked through possibilities. 3 feathers bound together, perhaps, placed high enough to be seen from the ridge to the east. Samuel studied her with newfound appreciation. Miss Eleanor, you continue to surprise me. Most women in your position would be barricading the doors, not sending out invitations. Eleanor's expression remained resolute. These children deserve to be with their people, Samuel. And their people deserve to know they're alive. Fear might be the common currency on this frontier, but it's not one I choose to trade in. As they returned to the warmth of the cabin, Eleanor paused to check on the sleeping triplets. Grace had curled protectively toward her brothers, her small hand resting against William's side as if offering strength. The sight reinforced Eleanor's conviction that her course of action, despite its risks, was the only one her conscience would allow. Outside, the moon cast long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, illuminating both the beauty and danger of the frontier that had shaped Eleanor's life. Somewhere in that vast wilderness, she felt certain, others were keeping vigil as well, searching for 3 small lives that had unexpectedly become entwined with her own. 4 days after finding the triplets, Eleanor stood at the eastern edge of her property, helping Samuel secure 3 eagle feathers to a tall pine that overlooked the ridge. The feathers, bound together with red cloth, had been among James's personal effects, gifts from a Lakota hunter whose horse he had once treated for a severe leg injury. "Do you really think they'll understand the message?" Samuel asked as they stepped back to assess their work. "I don't know," Eleanor admitted, "but it feels right to try." The signal established, they returned to the daily demands of ranch life, now complicated by caring for 3 infants. Eleanor had developed a system that allowed her to maintain essential ranch operations while attending to the triplets' needs. Grace and George continued to thrive, their appetites robust and their curious eyes following Eleanor's movements with increasing awareness. William's condition remained precarious. The pneumonia that Emily had diagnosed had neither worsened nor fully abated, leaving him in a fragile state that required constant monitoring. At night, Eleanor slept beside his makeshift crib, waking at the slightest change in his breathing. To administer willow bark extract or adjust his position, "You'd make a fine mother," Samuel observed one morning, finding Eleanor singing softly to the triplets as she prepared their milk. The comment, offered casually, struck an unexpected chord. In the years following James's death, Eleanor had resigned herself to childlessness, a life defined by her ranch rather than family. Now, watching Grace's tiny hand wrap around her finger, she felt the stirring of maternal feelings she'd long suppressed. "They need more than I can give them," she replied, maintaining the practical demeanor that had become her hallmark. "They need their people, their culture, and if their people don't come," Samuel pressed gently. Eleanor had no answer that satisfied her conscience. Taking the children permanently, raising them as her own, would mean separating them from their heritage, their language, the traditions that formed their birthright. Yet the alternative, surrendering them to government agents who would place them in an institution or with missionary families intent on civilizing them, seemed equally unacceptable. The dilemma troubled her thoughts throughout the day, even as she tended to ranch business and welcomed Matthew back from Miller's Creek with much-needed supplies. "Town's buzzing with talk," Matthew reported as they unloaded the wagon. "Miller himself asked if we'd seen any Indian activity near the ranch. Seems the Foster brothers are organizing extra patrols around their property, claiming they found signs of Lakota scouts." Eleanor absorbed this information with growing concern. "Did you hear anything about Thomas running Fox?" Eleanor noted that despite her ceremonial appearance, Morning Star carried a leather satchel adorned with symbols Eleanor recognized as healing signs from James's books on native cultures. "You're a healer," she stated, rather than asked. "I walk between worlds," Morning Star confirmed. "The agency calls me interpreter. My people call me medicine woman." She extended her hands. "Let me see him." Eleanor hesitated only briefly before surrendering William to the woman's care. Morning Star cradled him with practiced expertise, her fingers gently probing his chest and throat as she listened to his labored breathing. Her assessment complete, she looked toward the door where the two warriors remained, speaking several rapid sentences in Lakota. One of the men immediately dismounted and approached, carrying a bundle wrapped in tanned deer hide. He entered the cabin with silent dignity, handing the package to Morning Star before retreating to stand near the door, his dark eyes constantly scanning the interior with alert vigilance. Samuel remained tense, positioned protectively near Eleanor, but she gestured for him to stand down. "They're here to help," she said quietly, "and we need their help." Morning Star unwrapped her bundle, revealing an assortment of dried plants, small pouches of powdered substances, and a ceramic container sealed with beeswax. Working with practiced efficiency, she mixed several ingredients in a small copper pot that she filled with water from Eleanor's stove reservoir. "Who is Black Elk?" Eleanor asked as the medicine woman worked. "Is he the children's father?" Morning Star paused momentarily, studying Eleanor's face as if gauging her worthiness to receive such information. "He is chief of our band. His wife, White Feather, died bringing these three into the world." Her hand moved in a gesture that encompassed all three sleeping infants. "It is rare among our people, 3 born at once. It was seen as powerful medicine, a blessing upon Black Elk's leadership." "How did they come to be lost in the storm?" Samuel asked, his initial wariness giving way to genuine curiosity. "They were traveling with their father's sister and 2 warriors," Morning Star explained, returning to her preparation. "Black Elk remained with our main camp to resolve a dispute with a neighboring band. The blizzard came suddenly, separating the party." Her expression darkened. "We found the bodies of Black Elk's sister and 1 warrior 2 days ago, frozen beneath snow. The other warrior still lives, but cannot speak of what happened. His mind walks in shadow places from the cold." The tragedy of the situation struck Eleanor deeply. These children had already lost their mother at birth, and now their aunt had perished trying to protect them. "I'm so sorry," she offered, knowing the inadequacy of the words even as she spoke them. Morning Star acknowledged the sentiment with a slight nod as she placed her pot on the stove to heat. "You found them by the Eastern Creek," she stated, not a question, but a confirmation of information already known. "Yes," Eleanor replied, wondering how the woman knew this specific detail. "They were sheltered beneath a fallen pine bough, had I not heard their cries." "The spirits guided your steps," Morning Star said simply. "Black Elk performed a seeking ceremony. The vision showed water and pine, but we could not find the place before the white storm came." The matter-of-fact reference to spiritual guidance might have seemed foreign to many frontier settlers, but Eleanor found herself nodding in understanding. How else to explain her inexplicable urge to venture out that night, to follow sounds that should have been inaudible through howling winds? As the mixture heated, Morning Star began singing softly, a melodic chant that seemed to fill the cabin with unexpected warmth. The warrior by the door closed his eyes briefly, his stern features relaxing as the song continued. Even Samuel appeared affected, his shoulders lowering from their defensive posture. When the concoction began to steam, Morning Star added a final ingredient, a pinch of reddish powder that filled the room with an aromatic scent reminiscent of pine and sweetgrass. She transferred the liquid to a shallow bowl, then gestured for Eleanor to bring blankets. "We must create a small lodge of healing," she explained, arranging the blankets to form a tent-like structure over William and the steaming bowl. "He will breathe these medicines deep into his chest. It will help the waters leave his lungs." Eleanor watched with fascination as Morning Star guided the process, occasionally adding more hot water to maintain the steam. William's breathing, which had been alarmingly labored, gradually eased as the treatment progressed. After nearly an hour, the medicine woman emerged from the blanket tent with the infant cradled against her shoulder. "His spirit fights strongly," she announced with quiet approval. "He will need more treatments, but the dangerous path has narrowed." Relief flooded through Eleanor so intensely that she found herself blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching out to stroke William's cheek, now cooler to the touch. Morning Star studied her with renewed interest. "You care for them as if they were your own blood." "They're children who needed help," Eleanor replied simply. "Nothing more complicated than that. Among my people, nothing is more complicated or more sacred than the bond between those who give life and those who preserve it." Morning Star's usually inscrutable expression softened. "Black Elk will want to thank you himself." The statement, delivered casually, sent a ripple of apprehension through the cabin. Samuel straightened, his protective instincts resurfacing. "The chief is coming here? When?" Morning Star glanced toward the warrior by the door, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings. "Swift Arrow will return to our camp at first light. Black Elk rides with 20 lodges, following our trail. They are perhaps 2 days' journey from this place." The implications were momentous. 20 lodges would represent a significant portion of a Lakota band, perhaps 100 people including warriors, women, and children. Such a group approaching a frontier ranch would certainly attract attention from neighboring settlers, potentially creating alarm throughout the region. "Your neighbors fear our presence," Morning Star observed, seeming to read Eleanor's thoughts. "They see only enemies where there might be allies." "Fear speaks loudest when understanding is absent," Eleanor replied. "Will you stay until Black Elk arrives? William may need more of your medicine." The request appeared to surprise Morning Star, though she concealed it quickly. "I will stay," she agreed, glancing at the warrior who nodded his acceptance of this plan. "Swift Arrow will inform our people." With arrangements made for Morning Star to remain at the ranch, Swift Arrow and the second warrior departed into the night, their silhouettes dissolving into the moonlit landscape with practiced stealth. Samuel, still concerned about potential complications, agreed to inform Matthew and Daniel about the developments at first light. "You understand what you're doing, Miss Eleanor?" he asked quietly before retiring to his pallet. "Hosting a Lakota. Medicine woman preparing to receive a chief and his band. Folks in Miller's Creek won't take kindly to this news." "I understand perfectly," Eleanor replied with quiet determination. "I'm doing what any decent person should do, returning lost children to their family and helping them heal in the meantime. If that challenges certain frontier sensibilities, perhaps those sensibilities need challenging." Samuel's weathered face creased into a reluctant smile. "James would be mighty proud of you right now. He always said you had more courage than sense." "A compliment I'll gladly accept," Eleanor returned, with a tired smile of her own. As Samuel settled into sleep, Eleanor found herself alone with Morning Star, who sat cross-legged beside the Triplets' makeshift crib, her hand resting lightly on William's chest as she monitored his breathing. The medicine woman's presence transformed the humble cabin, bringing an atmosphere of ancient wisdom that transcended the cultural divisions of the frontier. "You lived among white people," Eleanor observed softly, noting the woman's perfect English and her comfort with Western objects. Morning Star's expression remained serene, though something flickered briefly in her eyes. "The government school took me when I was 7. I learned your language, your writing, your God. Her fingers absently traced the beadwork on her dress. "When I returned to my people at 16, I had to relearn what had been taken from me." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, recognizing the familiar pattern of forced assimilation that had affected so many native children. "The path between worlds is never smooth," Morning Star replied philosophically. "But it allows me to serve my people in ways others cannot." She gestured toward the sleeping infants. "These three will walk unusual paths as well. Born together, lost to the storm, found by a white woman with an uncommon heart." The observation hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together and the unpredictable consequences that might follow. Matthew nodded. "Miller said he passed through about 3 weeks ago, heading toward the agency at Standing Rock. Probably won't be back until spring thaw. The news eliminated their most promising avenue for establishing peaceful contact with the Triplets people." Eleanor concealed her disappointment, focusing instead on the supplies Matthew had procured: additional cloth for diapers, condensed milk, and a small bottle of honey that Emily had recommended for treating William's persistent cough. As dusk approached, Daniel returned from his journey to Richardson's trading post, his expression grim as he dismounted in the yard. "Richardson's place was packed with ranchers swapping stories," he reported once, inside the warmth of the cabin. "2 separate groups claim they've spotted Lakota warriors moving east of Thunder Basin. Not just hunting parties, armed men traveling. With purpose." "Was there any mention of children?" Eleanor asked. Daniel shook his head. "Nothing specific, but Richardson himself said something odd. When I asked if he'd heard about any Lakota losing children in the blizzard, he got real quiet. Then he said, 'Some losses cut deeper than others, especially when they touch a chief's lodge.'" Eleanor exchanged meaningful glances with Samuel. "A chief's children," she said softly, looking toward the triplets sleeping peacefully in their makeshift crib. "That would explain the search parties and complicate our situation considerably," Samuel added. "If these little ones belonged to a Lakota leader, their disappearance wouldn't just be a family tragedy. It would have political significance within the tribe." The implications hung heavy in the air. A chief's children, particularly rare triplets, would hold special importance beyond their family value. Their loss might be seen not merely as a tragedy, but as a spiritual event, perhaps even an omen affecting the entire band. That night, as Eleanor tended to William's persistent cough, a new sound cut through the darkness, the distant howl of wolves echoing across the snow-covered hills. While not uncommon in winter, something about this particular chorus raised the hair on Eleanor's neck. The howls seemed to pattern themselves, repeated in a sequence that felt deliberate rather than random. Samuel noticed it too, pausing by the window as he prepared to return to the bunkhouse. "Those aren't just wolves," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked, though something in her already sensed the answer. "Lakota scouts sometimes use wolf calls to communicate across distances," he explained. "I heard it once years ago near the Black Hills. Makes the skin prickle when you realize it's human voices carrying those messages." Eleanor joined him at the window, peering into the darkness beyond the glass. "Are they watching us now, do you think?" "Possibly, or they're communicating with others about what they've found." Samuel's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle mounted near the door, a gesture he immediately checked when he caught Eleanor's expression. "We're not preparing for battle, Samuel," she stated firmly. "If they're watching, let them see that we're caring for the children, not harming them." Despite her confident words, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep that night, listening to the wolf calls until they gradually faded with the approach of dawn. William's condition seemed to worsen with the morning light, his breathing more labored, his small face flushed with fever despite the willow bark treatments. Emily Wilkerson, summoned by a worried Daniel, arrived by mid-morning. Her examination of the smallest triplet confirmed Eleanor's fears. "The infection has deepened," she said gravely. His little body is fighting hard, but he needs stronger medicine than what I can provide. What can we do? Eleanor asked, her voice tight with concern. Emily hesitated, her professional confidence momentarily shaken. Dr. Peterson won't be through Miller's Creek for another 2 weeks. By then, she didn't need to complete the thought. There's laudanum for the cough and pain, but it won't fight the infection. Eleanor cradled William gently, feeling his heated skin against her palm. In that moment, an unlikely possibility occurred to her, one that challenged frontier conventions but might offer the child his only chance. "What about Lakota medicine?" she asked quietly. Emily's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Indian remedies? They have certain plant knowledge that's effective, but settlers don't typically seek it out," Eleanor finished. "I understand the social implications, Emily. I'm asking about efficacy." The midwife considered the question with unexpected seriousness. "I've heard accounts from army doctors who observed Lakota treatments for respiratory ailments. They use a steam inhalation with certain herbs, pine needles, I believe, and something they call purple coneflower. Some swear the recovery rates exceed conventional treatments." It was enough for Eleanor to make her decision. "Then we need to find someone who knows these treatments." "You're suggesting we actively seek out the Lakota?" Samuel asked, his concern evident. After confirming these children likely belong to a chief, Eleanor's gaze remained steady. These children are their father's, regardless of his status. "And yes, I'm suggesting we find someone who can help save this child's life using knowledge we don't possess. Would you have me do less because of fear or pride?" The directness of her question silenced further objections. After Emily departed, with promises to return the following day, Eleanor outlined her plan to the 3 ranch hands gathered in her kitchen. "Daniel, ride to the eastern ridge where we place the signal, add a 4th feather, white if possible, and build a small fire beneath it. If there are Lakota watching as we suspect, they'll recognize it as an invitation to approach." "And if they approach with hostile intent?" Matthew asked, his youth making him the most openly anxious about potential confrontation. "They would have attacked already if that was their purpose," Eleanor reasoned. "We've had the children for days, clearly, visible through the windows. They're observing, assessing our intentions." Samuel nodded slowly, his initial skepticism giving way to grudging agreement. "Miss Eleanor's right. If they meant harm, we'd have known it by now, but inviting them directly, that's a bold move. William may not have time for caution." Eleanor replied simply, glancing toward the feverish infant. "Samuel, help me prepare the cabin. If we're to receive visitors, let's ensure they see we've treated these children with care and respect." Throughout the afternoon, Eleanor and Samuel rearranged the cabin's interior, prominently displaying the clean, comfortable space created for the triplets. Eleanor placed James's collection of Lakota crafts, a painted buffalo hide, several beaded pouches, and a ceremonial pipe he'd received as a gift, in visible positions that signaled respect for their culture. Daniel returned at sunset, his expression a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. "I did as you asked, set the signal and waited nearly 2 hours. He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Nothing happened at first. Then just as I was about to leave, I saw him, a lone rider on the far ridge. He watched me for several minutes, then raised his hand. "Did he approach?" Eleanor asked. "No, ma'am, but as I mounted to return, I heard it again. Those wolf calls from last night. Different pattern this time. Message received, I'd wager." That evening, a tense anticipation filled Whispering Pines Ranch. Matthew and Daniel took alternating watches from the bunkhouse window, while Samuel insisted on sleeping on Eleanor's floor, despite her assurances that such precautions were unnecessary. As midnight approached, William's condition took a worrying turn. His fever spiked dramatically. his tiny chest heaving with the effort of each breath. Eleanor held him upright against her shoulder, patting his back as he struggled through coughing spells that left him exhausted and trembling. "Stay with me, little fighter," she whispered, her own exhaustion forgotten as she paced the cabin floor, bouncing him gently in a rhythm that seemed to ease his distress slightly. Samuel, watching from his pallet near the stove, finally voiced the fear they both felt. If help doesn't come soon, he was interrupted by 3 distinct knocks at the cabin door, firm but measured, neither hesitant nor aggressive. Eleanor and Samuel exchanged startled glances, both recognizing this was no ordinary late-night visitor. "It appears we've been heard," Eleanor said softly, her arms tightening protectively around William as she nodded for Samuel to answer the door. The foreman moved cautiously, rifle within reach, but not in hand, as he unlatched the heavy wooden door. It swung open to reveal a sight that momentarily struck them both speechless. A Lakota woman in her 30s, wearing a fur-lined dress adorned with intricate beadwork, standing proudly in the moonlight. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, stood 2 mounted warriors, whose stillness suggested disciplined restraint rather than uncertainty. The woman's dark eyes moved past Samuel to fix on Eleanor and the infant in her arms. Her expression revealed nothing, but the intensity of her gaze conveyed everything essential about her purpose. "I am Morning Star," she announced in perfect, slightly accented English. "I have come for the children of Black Elk." Eleanor's first thought was not of fear, but of the struggling infant in her arms. "This child is very ill," she said, stepping forward. "He needs help that I cannot provide." Morning Star's gaze shifted to William, her stoic expression softening almost imperceptibly. "The smallest one always faced the hardest path," she replied enigmatically. Without waiting for an invitation, she moved past Samuel into the cabin, her movements graceful and deliberate. As dawn approached, Eleanor prepared a simple breakfast, while Morning Star administered another steam treatment to William. The little boy's improvement was remarkable, his breathing easier, his color better. His tiny hands, once again showing the strength to grip Eleanor's finger when she stroked his palm. "Your medicine is powerful," Eleanor commented as they shared coffee afterward. "The purple coneflower fights the sickness in the blood," Morning Star explained. "The pine needles and sage clear the breathing passages. The red powder—" She hesitated, seemingly deciding how much to share. "That comes from a root that grows in secret places. It strengthens the chest against water sickness." Eleanor absorbed this information with genuine interest, recognizing the sophisticated understanding of medicinal properties that Western medicine often dismissed as primitive. "Would you be willing to teach me about these plants, in case something like this happens again?" The request seemed to please Morning Star, though she masked it with practical considerations. "Some knowledge can be shared. Other medicines are sacred, given only to those chosen by the spirits." She studied Eleanor thoughtfully. "But perhaps the spirits have already chosen you in ways neither of us fully understands." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders, not from the direction of the bunkhouse, but from the main road leading to Miller's Creek. Morning Star moved immediately to the window, her body tensing as she peered through. The frost-etched glass. 4 men, she reported, armed, looking for trouble. Eleanor joined her at the window, her heart sinking as she recognized the distinctive, broad-brimmed hat of Jeremiah Foster, leading 3 other men from neighboring ranches. Their rifles were prominently displayed across their saddles, not unusual for frontier travel, but concerning given the likely purpose of their early morning visit. "They've heard something," Eleanor surmised. "Probably spotted your warriors traveling in the night." Morning Star's expression hardened. "Such men see only what feeds their fear. Stay inside with the children," Eleanor instructed, reaching for her coat. I'll speak with them." As she stepped onto the porch to confront her unexpected visitors, Eleanor felt a momentous threshold being crossed, one that would forever change her standing in the community she'd been part of since arriving on the sea frontier. Yet the rightness of her actions remained unquestioned in her heart, despite the challenges that now approached with the morning sun glinting off gun barrels and suspicious eyes. "Morning, gentlemen," Eleanor called as the riders entered her yard, her voice calm despite the tension evident in their postures. "You're out early." Jeremiah Foster, a rancher whose property lay 10 miles south, reined his horse to a stop, studying Eleanor with narrowed eyes. At 50, Foster was among the territory's earliest settlers, his weathered face bearing the scars of multiple confrontations with native tribes during the more violent years of frontier expansion. "Richardson's boy rode through at dawn," Foster stated without preamble. "Says he spotted Indian riders coming from the direction of your ranch last night." Eleanor maintained her composed demeanor. "And you thought you'd investigate rather than assuming I might have a perfectly reasonable explanation." The man flanking Foster, Henry Wilson, whose cattle operation adjoined Foster's land, spoke up. "These are dangerous times, Mrs. Blackwood, especially for a woman living alone." "I'm hardly alone," Eleanor countered, gesturing toward the bunkhouse where Samuel had emerged, rifle held casually but visibly at his side. "And I'm certainly not in any danger." Foster dismounted, his movement deliberately slow as he surveyed the property with suspicious eyes. "Word around Miller's Creek is you found something during the blizzard, something that's drawn Indian attention." The directness of the statement confirmed Eleanor's suspicion that information had already spread beyond her immediate circle. Someone, perhaps the mail carrier or even Emily Wilkerson, had shared news of the triplets. "I found 3 Lakota infants nearly frozen to death," she acknowledged, seeing no benefit in denial. "I've been caring for them until their family could be located." The revelation elicited muttered curses from the other riders. Wilson removed his hat, running a hand through thinning hair in evident disbelief. "You've been harboring Indian children without notifying the authorities?" Eleanor's spine stiffened. "I've been saving the lives of 3 babies who would have perished without intervention. If that requires official notification, you're welcome to ride to Fort Thompson and inform them yourself." Foster stepped closer, his expression hardening. "It's not just about the children anymore, Eleanor. Richardson says there's a war party gathering near Thunder Basin, 20 lodges at least, moving this direction." "It's not a war party," Eleanor corrected firmly. "It's a father coming for his children with his extended family." "A father?" The 4th rider spoke for the first time, Liam Donovan, whose small ranch bordered Eleanor's western boundary. Unlike the others, his tone conveyed curiosity rather than outright hostility. "These children belong to someone specific?" "They're the triplet children of a Lakota chief named Black Elk," Eleanor explained, directing her response to Donovan, the only one showing genuine interest rather than prejudice. "Their mother died in childbirth. They were being transported with their aunt when the blizzard separated them from their escort." Foster dismissed this information with a contemptuous gesture. "Makes no difference whose papooses they are. What matters is you've given Sioux warriors a reason to approach settled lands. You've put every ranch and homestead within 20 miles at risk." The accusation stung, though Eleanor had anticipated it. "These people aren't looking for conflict, Jeremiah. They're coming peacefully to retrieve their children." "There's no such thing as peaceful Indians in these numbers," Foster insisted, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered revolver. "I've called a meeting at Miller's Creek, noon today. Every able-bodied man should attend." His gaze hardened as it returned to Eleanor. "We're organizing a defensive force. The territory militia will be notified." The escalation alarmed Eleanor more than she let show. A hastily organized militia operating on fear and rumor rather than facts could transform a peaceful retrieval into a violent confrontation with devastating consequences. "You're making a serious mistake," she warned, "creating an armed response to a situation that requires none." Foster stepped closer, his voice lowering. "The mistake, Mrs. Blackwood, was yours, taking in Indian offspring, harboring their kind on your property." He glanced toward her cabin with undisguised suspicion. Some might even call it treasonous. Samuel moved forward at this, his protective instincts triggered by Foster's increasingly threatening demeanor. "That's enough, Jeremiah. You've delivered your message. Now I suggest you and your friends continue on to Miller's Creek." A tense silence followed, broken only by the nervous shifting of horses sensing their riders' agitation. Foster held Samuel's gaze for several long seconds before finally nodding curtly. "Noon, Miller's Creek," he repeated, returning to his mount. "I'd advise you to attend, Mrs. Blackwood. Explain yourself to folks who've been neighbors longer than you've been widowed." The deliberate reference to her relatively recent arrival and vulnerable status was not lost on Eleanor. As the men rode away, Samuel joined Eleanor on the porch, his expression troubled. "This is turning ugly faster than I expected." "Fear always outpaces reason," Eleanor replied, watching the riders disappear down the road. "We need to send word to Black Elk's people. If they encounter an armed militia unprepared, blood could be spilled needlessly." Inside the cabin, they found Morning Star already preparing to depart. The medicine woman had overheard enough of the conversation to understand the deteriorating situation. "I must warn Black Elk," she stated, gathering her healing supplies. "It would be best if I leave now, before more of your kind arrive seeking trouble." Eleanor nodded reluctantly, recognizing the wisdom in this course of action. "William's treatment. Will he be all right until you return?" Morning Star approached the makeshift crib where the triplets slept. William's breathing had improved dramatically after her treatments, but Eleanor could see the medicine woman's concern as she examined him one final time. "I will prepare more of the steam medicine," she decided, efficiently measuring ingredients into a small deerskin pouch. 3 times each day, heat water, and add this amount." She demonstrated the proper quantity with her fingers. "Create the blanket lodge as I showed you. It should sustain him until our return." Eleanor accepted the instructions and the precious medicine with solemn appreciation. "How will you find Black Elk's party?" "They follow the Ghost Creek pathway," Morning Star replied. "If I ride hard, I can reach them by nightfall." While the medicine woman prepared for departure, Eleanor conferred with Samuel about the meeting in Miller's Creek. "I need to attend," she concluded after weighing the options. "If there's any chance of preventing violence, I must try to reason with them." Samuel's weathered face registered his doubt. "Men like Foster won't be reasoned with, Miss Eleanor. They've been waiting for an excuse like this. Indian troubles. Justify their importance, give them purpose. Nevertheless, someone must speak for sanity," Eleanor insisted. "Daniel can stay with the children. You and Matthew will accompany me to town." By mid-morning, Morning Star had departed, riding northeast on a horse borrowed from Eleanor's stable. Her departure was conducted with minimal farewell, practical necessity outweighing ceremonial courtesies. Before leaving, however, she had stood beside the triplets one final time, singing a soft melody that Eleanor recognized as a protection song from her limited knowledge of Lakota traditions. "I will return with their father," Morning Star had promised, her dark eyes holding Eleanor's gaze with unmistakable intensity. What happens after will depend on the wisdom of both peoples. With the medicine woman gone, Eleanor focused on preparing the triplets for her absence. She fed them carefully, changed their wrappings, and administered William's steam treatment according to Morning Star's instructions. The smallest triplet responded well, his breathing growing stronger with each passing hour. Keep them warm and fed, she instructed Daniel as she prepared to depart for Miller's Creek. If William's breathing worsens, use the medicine exactly as I showed you. Daniel nodded, though his discomfort with childcare was evident. At 36, the ranch hand had never married or fathered children, making this responsibility particularly unchallenging. Still, his loyalty to Eleanor overrode his personal reservations. "What should I do if Indians arrive while you're gone?" he asked, the practical question revealing his underlying anxiety. Eleanor considered her response carefully. "If Black Elk comes with Morning Star, welcome him respectfully. Explain that I've gone to prevent misunderstandings among my neighbors. If others arrive without them, use your judgment. But remember that the Triplets' safety is our primary concern." The 12-mile ride to Miller's Creek provided Eleanor time to organize her thoughts and strategy. Samuel and Matthew rode silently beside her, their expressions betraying their concern about the reception awaiting them in town. Miller's Creek had grown substantially since Eleanor's arrival in the territory, evolving from a simple trading post to a respectable settlement with a general store, livery stable, small schoolhouse, and the combination saloon hotel that served as the community's social center. As they approached, Eleanor noted with growing apprehension the unusual number of horses hitched outside Miller's establishment. At least 30 riders had answered Foster's call. "More than I expected," Samuel muttered as they dismounted. "Word travels fast when it involves Indian fears." Inside Miller's saloon, conversation ceased abruptly as Eleanor entered, flanked by her ranch hands. The room was packed with men from surrounding properties. Some she recognized, others strangers likely drawn from more distant homesteads. Foster stood near the bar, a map spread before him as he addressed the gathered crowd. "Mrs. Blackwood," he acknowledged with cold formality. "I'm surprised you chose to join us." "I'm still a member of this community," Eleanor replied steadily, "and I have relevant information about the situation you're discussing." Foster's dismissive gesture suggested her contribution held little value, but Liam Donovan created space for her near the front of the room. "Let's hear what she has to say," he suggested reasonably. "She's the only one who's had direct contact." Granted this opportunity, Eleanor addressed the assembled men with clear, measured tones. "Many of you know I found 3 Lakota infants during the blizzard. What you may not know is they're the children of Chief Black Elk, separated from their escort during the storm." She paused, gauging the reaction. Most faces remained skeptical, though a few showed genuine interest. "I've been in contact with a Lakota medicine woman who confirmed their identity. Black Elk is indeed approaching with his extended family to retrieve his children, but his intentions are peaceful. Creating an armed response will only provoke the very conflict you claim to fear." Foster pushed away from the bar, his posture challenging. "And we're supposed to trust your assessment of Indian intentions? A woman alone, possibly influenced by sympathies unbecoming a settler?" The insinuation drew murmurs from the crowd, some supportive of Foster's position, others uncomfortable with his tone. Eleanor refused to be baited into an emotional response. "I'm speaking from first-hand knowledge, not fear or speculation," she countered. "These children were nearly dead when I found them. I've nursed them back to health. Their father is coming to bring them home. That's the entirety of the situation." Sheriff Thomas Landry, who had been listening silently from the corner, finally spoke. Though new to his position, the former Army scout had earned respect for his measured approach to frontier justice. "How many in this approaching party, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, his tone professional rather than accusatory. "Approximately 20 lodges," Eleanor answered honestly. "Family groups, not a war party." Foster slammed his hand on the bar. 20 lodges means at least 40 warriors. Are we supposed to just welcome that many armed Indians into our territory?" The room erupted in heated debate, with Eleanor's voice nearly drowned by competing opinions. The community stood divided, some agreeing with Foster's call for armed resistance, others suggesting more measured approaches. As the argument intensified, Eleanor realized that reason alone might not prevail. Against generations of fear and mistrust, the prospect of violence loomed ever larger, threatening not only the peaceful return of the Triplets, but potentially igniting broader conflicts that could engulf the entire region. In that moment, standing firm amid hostile stares and suspicious whispers, Eleanor Blackwood understood that saving 3 infant lives had set in motion events that would test not only her courage, but the fragile coexistence that defined the Dakota frontier. Sheriff Landry's authoritative voice finally cut through the chaotic debate in Miller's saloon. "That's enough," he commanded, silencing the room with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to managing volatile situations. "This isn't a vote on whether to start a war. That's not within our jurisdiction." Foster bristled visibly. "If the army won't protect us, we have the right to protect ourselves." "From what exactly?" Eleanor challenged. "From a father coming to retrieve his children." "From 40 armed warriors invading settled territory," Foster countered sharply. Landry raised his hands, preventing the argument from reigniting. "Here's what's going to happen," he announced, his tone leaving no room for debate. "I'll dispatch a rider to Fort Thompson with an urgent message explaining the situation. Meanwhile, I'll personally investigate Mrs. Blackwood's claims." He turned to Eleanor. "I'll ride back with you to your ranch to see these children and assess the situation firsthand." His gaze then swept the room. "The rest of you will return to your properties. Remain vigilant, but take no offensive action. Anyone forming an unauthorized militia will answer to territorial law." Foster's face darkened with barely suppressed anger. "By the time the army responds, it could be too late. And by acting prematurely, you could provoke the very conflict you claim to fear," Landry countered. "My decision is final." Though clearly dissatisfied, most of the gathered men respected the sheriff's authority. As the meeting disbanded, Eleanor found herself approached by Liam Donovan, whose moderate position during the debate had not gone unnoticed. "You're taking a significant risk, Eleanor," he said quietly. "Not everyone will heed the sheriff's warning. Foster has been gathering supporters for months, talking about handling the Indian problem once and for all." "I'm aware," Eleanor replied, appreciating his concern. "But I can't abandon those children to political grudges and ancient fears." Donovan nodded thoughtfully. "My grandmother was half Cheyenne. She used to say that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right despite your fear." He touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "I believe she would have approved of your actions." This unexpected support bolstered Eleanor's resolve as she prepared to depart with Sheriff Landry. Samuel and Matthew exchanged significant glances as the sheriff saddled his horse to join them, both clearly relieved to have law enforcement accompanying their return journey. As they rode away from Miller's Creek, Eleanor noted with concern that Foster and several of his closest allies had gathered outside the livery stable, their hushed conversation and furtive glances suggesting plans contrary to the sheriff's instructions. "Foster won't stand down," she observed to Landry once they were beyond earshot. The sheriff nodded grimly. "I know. That's why I'm coming with you. The man's been looking for an excuse to prove his frontier mettle since the army pacified this region. He sees your Lakota visitors as his opportunity." "They're not my Lakota," Eleanor corrected gently. "They're simply people coming for their children." Landry studied her with newfound respect. "Most widows in your position would have surrendered those infants to the nearest Indian agency without a second thought, and condemned them to life in a government school or missionary orphanage?" Eleanor shook her head. "That wasn't an option I could live with." The 12-mile ride back to Whispering Pines provided time for Eleanor to share the full story of finding the triplets and the subsequent visit from Morning Star. Landry listened attentively, asking occasional questions that revealed his extensive knowledge of Lakota customs and leadership structures. Black Elk, he mused when Eleanor mentioned the chief's name. I've heard of him. Respected leader, moderate in his dealings with the government. Fought with crazy horse as a young man, but accepted the reality of reservation boundaries after Little Bighorn. You seem well informed about Lakota affairs, Eleanor observed. Landry's expression turned reflective. 5 years with the 7th. Cavalry teaches you to know your opponents. 3 more years as an army scout required understanding their ways. He paused. Though I came to realize they weren't really opponents at all, just people defending their way of life, same as anyone would. This perspective, unusual among frontier lawmen, explained Landry's measured response to the situation. Unlike Foster, whose hatred of native peoples stemmed from deeply ingrained prejudice, the sheriff's approach was informed by actual experience and understanding. Upon reaching Whispering Pines, they found Daniel vigilantly watching from the porch, rifle across. His knees, a precaution that seemed excessive until he explained the reason for his alertness. Riders passed by about an hour ago, he reported as they dismounted. Foster's youngest boy and 2 men I didn't recognize. They kept their distance, just watching the property from the eastern ridge. Scouts, Landry concluded grimly. Foster's, ignoring my direct order. Inside the cabin, the sheriff examined the triplets with careful attention. William had improved notably since Morning Star's treatment, though he remained smaller and more fragile than his siblings. Grace and George had become increasingly alert and responsive, their dark eyes tracking movements across the room with evident curiosity. Beautiful children, Landry commented, gently touching Grace's tiny hand as she grasped his finger with surprising strength. And you say they're triplets? That's exceptionally rare among any people. Morning Star mentioned it was seen as spiritually significant, Eleanor confirmed, preparing William's medicine as she spoke. A blessing upon Black Elk's leadership. Landry nodded thoughtfully, which explains the size of the approaching party. These aren't just any children. They represent the future of their band. Their loss would be considered not just a family tragedy, but a potential sign of disfavor from the Creator. As evening approached, Eleanor administered William's treatment, while Samuel prepared a simple meal. Landry stationed himself by the window, occasionally studying the surrounding landscape through field glasses borrowed from Eleanor's late husband. Movement to the northeast, he reported suddenly as the sun began its descent. Several riders coming fast. Eleanor joined him at the window, her heart racing with apprehension. Foster's men? No, Landry replied, adjusting the glasses for better focus. Different riding style, lower in the saddle. He lowered the glasses, his expression grave. Lakota. At least 6 warriors, and they're coming directly toward the ranch. Samuel immediately moved to retrieve his rifle, but Landry raised a hand to stop him. No weapons unless absolutely necessary. If these are Black Elk scouts, any sign of aggression would confirm Foster's narrative. The approaching riders slowed. As they neared the property, clearly conducting a careful assessment before committing to closer contact. Finally, a single figure separated from the group, advancing toward the cabin with deliberate purpose. Morning Star, Eleanor identified with relief, recognizing the medicine woman's distinctive posture, even at a distance. The reunion was brief and purposeful. Morning Star entered the cabin with the same dignified presence as before, though her expression carried new urgency. She acknowledged Sheriff Landry with cautious respect before turning to Eleanor. Black Elk comes, she announced without preamble. I found his party earlier than expected. They travel swiftly, their hearts pulled by concern for the little ones. How far? Landry asked directly. Morningstar measured the sheriff with her gaze, evidently deciding he warranted an honest response. They camped tonight at Brokenstone Creek. They will reach this place by midday tomorrow. The timeline was tighter than Eleanor had anticipated. There's something you should know, she explained, quickly summarizing the meeting in Miller's Creek and Foster's likely intentions. Morningstar absorbed this information with stoic calm, though her eyes revealed understanding of its implications. It is an old story, she said finally. Men who seek conflict will always find reasons to create it. Can Black Elk adjust his approach? Landry asked, his tactical mind already seeking alternatives. Perhaps come with fewer warriors, reducing the perception of threat. Morningstar shook her head. He travels with his council and extended family. 20 lodges have moved together for the children's homecoming. It is a matter of honor and spiritual significance. She paused, studying Landry with renewed interest. You understand our ways better than most white men with badges. Understanding doesn't always translate to solutions, Landry replied grimly. Foster is gathering men despite my direct orders. He'll interpret Black Elk's approach as confirmation of his fears. Eleanor felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. What had begun as a simple act of humanity, rescuing freezing children from certain death, had escalated into a potential armed confrontation between cultures with a long history of mutual suspicion and violence. There must be a way to prevent bloodshed, she insisted, looking between Morningstar and the sheriff. Perhaps, Morningstar acknowledged, her gaze drifting to the triplets sleeping peacefully in their makeshift crib. But it will require courage from both sides, and wisdom that is often in short supply at such moments. She approached William, examining him carefully before nodding with approval at his improved condition. You have followed my instructions well, she told Eleanor. His spirit grows stronger. Outside, the remaining Lakota scouts had taken positions on the surrounding ridgelines, not threatening, but vigilant. Their presence would certainly be noted by any settlers passing nearby, likely triggering further alarm throughout the community. As darkness fell, Eleanor, Landry, and Morningstar gathered around the kitchen table, reviewing limited options for averting potential disaster. Samuel maintained watch from the porch, while Matthew and Daniel secured the horses and outbuildings, against the possibility of unwelcome nighttime visitors. I could ride to meet Black Elk, Landry suggested. Officially welcome him as the territorial representative, escort his party to the ranch. The official sanction might deter Foster from direct action, or it might fracture your community's trust in your authority, Morningstar countered. These frontier people see accommodation of our rights as weakness. Eleanor listened to their exchange, struck by the surreal nature of the situation, a frontier sheriff and a Lakota medicine woman calmly debating diplomatic strategies at her kitchen table, while 3 infant triplets slept nearby, blissfully, unaware of the gathering storm their existence had provoked. What if we brought the children to Black Elk, she suggested suddenly. Rather than waiting for him to arrive, we could meet him at Brokenstone Creek tonight. Deliver the triplets safely, allow his people to return to their territory without approaching settled lands. Both Landry and Morningstar considered this proposal with thoughtful attention. It addresses the immediate issue, the sheriff acknowledged, but it might appear as surrender to Foster's intimidation, and it denies Black Elk the opportunity to honor the one who saved his children, Morningstar added. In our ways, such recognition must be properly given. Their discussion continued into the night, weighing options against increasingly limited time. Shortly after midnight, Samuel's urgent voice called from the porch. Riders approaching from the south, at least a dozen. Landry moved swiftly to the window, his expression hardening as he recognized the approaching party. Foster, he confirmed grimly, and he's brought friends. The sheriff checked his revolver with practiced efficiency before turning to Eleanor. "Stay inside with the children and Morning Star. I'll handle this." As Landry stepped onto the porch to confront the uninvited visitors, Eleanor found herself standing beside Morning Star, the two women united in their concern despite the cultural divide that separated their life experiences. "Your people have a saying," Morning Star observed quietly. "The storm breaks strongest trees while bending grasses survive." Eleanor nodded, understanding the wisdom in the observation. Flexibility might prove more valuable than rigid opposition. In the hours ahead, as three cultures, settler, Lakota, and the frontier justice system, converged on her small ranch with potentially explosive results. Outside, Landry's authoritative voice rang out in the darkness, challenging Foster's unauthorized assembly. The confrontation that followed would determine whether wisdom or fear would govern the approaching dawn, and with it, the fate of three small lives that had unexpectedly become the catalyst for a larger reckoning between worlds in collision. "Sheriff." Landry stood unwavering on Eleanor's porch, his hand resting near his holstered revolver, as Foster and his dozen armed men formed a semicircle in the yard. The moonlight cast harsh shadows across their faces, revealing expressions ranging from nervous determination to outright hostility. "This is an unlawful assembly, Foster," Landry declared. "I gave explicit orders against forming a militia." Foster dismounted slowly, his rifle held in a deliberately non-threatening position, but still visibly present. "We're not a militia, Sheriff, just concerned citizens checking on a neighbor's welfare." His thin smile did nothing to disguise the falsehood, especially when said neighbor has been harboring hostiles. "The only hostile intentions I'm seeing are the ones you've brought to Mrs. Blackwood's property," Landry countered. "I'm here officially investigating the situation. Everything is under control." Foster's gaze drifted to the surrounding ridgelines, where Lakota scouts maintained their vigilant positions, under control, with Indian spies watching from every direction. He gestured broadly. "My sources say a war chief is headed this way with 40 braves. We're not waiting for them to reach settled territory." Eleanor stepped onto the porch beside Landry, her presence drawing muttered comments from several of Foster's companions. "Black Elk is coming peacefully for his children," she stated firmly. "The only threat of violence is the one you're creating, Jeremiah." Foster's expression hardened. "Always thought James Blackwood showed poor judgment marrying, an Eastern woman with more education than sense. Now you're proving it by putting the entire territory at risk." Samuel and Matthew emerged from the bunkhouse, taking positions that effectively flanked Foster's group. Though outnumbered, their strategic placement created a clear message that confrontation would come at a price. "I'm giving you one chance to disperse," Landry announced, his voice carrying the weight of territorial law. "Return to your properties and await official word from Fort Thompson." A tense silence followed as Foster visibly calculated his options. Eleanor could almost see the competing impulses warring within him. The desire to assert his self-appointed role as defender of settler interests versus the real consequences of defying lawful authority. The standoff might have continued indefinitely had not a new sound drawn everyone's attention. A lone rider approaching at speed from the east, the direction of Broken Stone Creek, where Black Elk's band was encamped. All eyes turned to watch as the figure drew closer, eventually revealing a young Lakota warrior no more than 20 years old. He rode directly into the yard, seemingly oblivious to the tension his arrival intensified, before dismounting with fluid grace and addressing Morning Star, who had appeared in the doorway behind Eleanor. Their rapid exchange in Lakota excluded the observers, though the urgent tone needed no translation. When they finished, Morning Star stepped forward, her regal bearing commanding attention despite her diminutive stature. "Black Elk has moved his camp during the night," she announced. He approaches now with his council of elders. No women, no children, no family lodges, only 12 men. The revelation prompted confused murmurs among Foster's group. This dramatic reduction in numbers contradicted their intelligence and undermined the narrative of imminent invasion that had justified their assembly. "Why the change?" Landry asked. Morningstar's gaze moved deliberately to Eleanor. "Because a trusted messenger informed him of the danger his full approach might create. He chooses to put aside traditional protocols to ensure the safe return of his children." Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude toward the medicine woman, realizing she must have sent a rider to Black Elk during the night with warnings about Foster's intentions. The chief had adapted his plans at significant cultural cost, prioritizing peace over the ceremonial homecoming his children's status would normally require. Foster appeared temporarily disarmed by this development, though suspicion still clouded his features. 12 braves is still a war party by any measure. 12 men, including elders, hardly constitutes a threat to armed settlers, Landry countered, especially when their intent is clearly peaceful. The momentum had shifted, and Eleanor seized the opportunity. "Gentlemen," she addressed Foster's increasingly uncertain companions, "you came to prevent violence, not instigate it. Black Elk has shown good faith by limiting his approach party. Will you do less by refusing to recognize his peaceful intentions?" Her appeal resonated with several of the men, particularly those who had families waiting at home and less personal investment. In Foster's agenda, one by one, they began exchanging uncomfortable glances, their earlier certainty visibly eroding. "First light's less than an hour away," Liam Donovan observed from among Foster's group. "I propose we wait and observe this meeting between Mrs. Blackwood and the chief. If his intentions prove honorable as she claims, we return home knowing our concerns were addressed. If not—" He left the implication hanging. Foster recognized his diminishing control of the situation. "Fine," he conceded with poor grace. "We'll withdraw to the ridge and maintain watch. Any sign of treachery, any indication of additional warriors joining them, and we intervene immediately." Though far from ideal, the compromise diffused the immediate threat of armed confrontation. Foster led his reluctant militia to a position on the western ridge, close enough to observe but removed from direct interference. As dawn broke across the eastern horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold, Eleanor prepared the triplets for their long-awaited reunion with their father. She bathed them carefully, dressed them in clean clothes fashioned from soft flannel, and wrapped them in the beautiful buffalo hide receiving blankets Morningstar had brought during her first visit. William, whose fragile health had caused such concern, now breathed easily and had begun showing the same alertness as his siblings. He grasped Eleanor's finger with surprising strength as she tended to him, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that tugged at her heart. "You're going home today, little warrior," she whispered, surprised by the mixture of joy and melancholy the realization evoked. In just 1 week, these 3 tiny lives had transformed her solitary existence, awakening maternal instincts she had long suppressed after James's death. Morningstar approached, observing Eleanor's emotional struggle with quiet understanding. "In our belief, children who face death at birth carry special wisdom," she said softly. "They have glimpsed the spirit world and returned. These 3 will never forget you, even if their minds do not remember." The philosophical comfort helped. Eleanor centered herself for what was to come. Sheriff Landry maintained a watchful position on the porch, his field glasses trained on both approaching directions, east toward Black Elk's party and west where Foster's men maintained their vigilant observation. "They're coming," he announced finally, lowering the glasses. 12 riders as promised. Black Elk leads them himself." Eleanor joined him outside, cradling William while Samuel carried George and Grace. The approaching Lakota party rode in formal formation, with a distinguished figure at the center, whom Eleanor immediately recognized as a leader even without introduction. Black Elk sat tall on a painted stallion, his bearing regal without appearing rigid. At perhaps 45 years of age, his face carried the weathered experience of one who had witnessed the transformation of his world, yet maintained his dignity throughout. As the party drew closer, they slowed their approach, eventually stopping. At a respectful distance from the cabin, Black Elk alone continued forward, dismounting with deliberate grace before handing his reins to a younger warrior. He wore no war paint, no elaborate ceremonial dress, only the practical winter garments of a Lakota leader, accented by a single eagle feather in his hair and a peace medal that gleamed against his chest. Morning Star moved to meet him, conducting a brief exchange that Eleanor understood was both introduction and explanation. Then, with formal dignity, the medicine woman gestured toward Eleanor and the children. Black Elk approached slowly, his dark eyes taking in the scene with careful attention, the white woman holding his smallest son, the ranch hands supporting. His other children, the sheriff standing protectively nearby. When he stopped several paces away, the emotion in his face became visible despite his maintained composure. "I am Black Elk," he stated in perfect unaccented English that momentarily surprised Eleanor. "You have saved my children when all seemed lost." Eleanor found herself unexpectedly moved by the quiet dignity in his voice. "They're remarkable children," she replied simply. "They've fought hard to survive." Black Elk's gaze moved to each triplet, in turn lingering on William with particular intensity. "The smallest one? He lives well?" "He had pneumonia," Eleanor explained. "Morning Star's medicine saved him when our treatments couldn't help." The chief nodded, acknowledging this information with grave appreciation. "May I?" he asked, extending his hands toward William. Eleanor stepped forward, carefully transferring the smallest triplet to his father's arms. The moment carried profound weight, cultural boundaries bridged by the simple universal bond between parent and child. Black Elk held his son with practiced gentleness, examining his face with undisguised wonder before speaking softly in Lakota, words Eleanor couldn't understand, but whose meaning was unmistakable. A father's blessing upon a child returned from the edge of existence. The ritual repeated with George and Grace, each transfer conducted with ceremonial care that honored both the children's journey and Eleanor's role in their survival. When all three triplets were finally in their father's embrace, Black Elk turned toward his waiting council, presenting the children with evident pride. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the gathered warriors, several making gestures that Eleanor recognized as spiritual acknowledgments. From the western ridge, Foster and his men watched in silent witness, their earlier hostility seemingly diminished by the undeniable humanity of the scene unfolding before them. Black Elk returned, his attention to Eleanor, handing the triplets to three elders who had approached from the waiting group. "In our way there is no greater debt than the one owed to one who preserves the life of our children." His voice carried formal solemnity. "You have saved not just my sons and daughter, but the hope of our people. Such an act requires proper recognition." He raised his hand, signaling toward the eastern horizon. In response, riders appeared along the distant ridge. Not 12, but dozens, emerging from concealed positions in the surrounding landscape. Eleanor heard Foster's men reacting with alarm, but Sheriff Landry's raised hand kept them from immediate action. "I promised 12 would approach," Black Elk explained, "and only 12 did. But our tradition demands witnesses to honor debt. Repayment." He gestured toward the gathering warriors, whose numbers continued to swell. 100 warriors stand witness today, not for war, but for sacred recognition. The warriors began descending toward the ranch in a great circle, surrounding the property not with menace but with ceremonial purpose. They carried no weapons at the ready, only staffs adorned with eagle feathers and ceremonial shields painted with spiritual symbols. Foster's nervous militia maintained their positions, clearly uncertain how to interpret this unexpected development. Sheriff Landry moved among them, his calm authority preventing impulsive reactions as the impressive display continued. When the circle was complete, Black Elk addressed Eleanor once more. "You entered the killing storm to save lives not of your blood or people. You defended them against those who would have taken them from their rightful heritage. You sought healing wisdom beyond your own traditions when their need required it." Each statement resonated with formal acknowledgement of actions that transcended cultural boundaries. "From this day forward," he continued, his voice carrying across the silent landscape, "you will be known among the Lakota as Wikapi Waste Win, Good Star Woman who guided lost children home. Your ranch and all within it are under the protection of my people for as long as grass grows and water flows." From among the circled warriors, 3 riders approached, elders whose ceremonial regalia marked them as spiritual leaders. They presented Eleanor with carefully wrapped gifts, a beautifully beaded cradle board representing children and their care, a ceremonial blanket symbolizing protection, and most significantly, a peace pipe whose craftsmanship suggested generations of sacred use. "These gifts cannot repay what you have given," Black Elk explained, "but they bind our peoples together in ways that papers signed by distant governments cannot." The ceremony concluded with a song that rose from the 100 warriors in harmonic unity, a melody that needed no translation as it carried emotions of gratitude, respect, and honor across the cultural divide that had momentarily dissolved in recognition of shared humanity. As the warriors gradually dispersed, returning to their waiting families at Broken Stone Creek, Eleanor found herself standing beside Black Elk in a moment of quiet acknowledgement. "The storm brought great sorrow when it took my sister," the chief said softly, "but it also revealed a light in the darkness, proof that compassion can survive even in these difficult times between our peoples." Eleanor watched as the triplets were carefully secured in specially designed carriers for their journey home. "Will you bring them back someday?" she asked, voicing the question her heart couldn't suppress. "So I might see how they grow?" Black Elk considered her request with thoughtful dignity. "Each spring, when the prairie flowers bloom, we will come to this place," he promised. "The children will know the woman who walked through death to give them life." From the western ridge, Foster and his militia had begun their own dispersal, the anticipated conflict replaced by witnessing something few settlers ever observed: the depth and complexity of Lakota ceremonial tradition expressed not in warfare, but in honor. As Eleanor watched Black Elk depart with his precious cargo, Sheriff Landry stepped beside her. "You've done something remarkable here," he observed quietly, "something that might echo beyond this day." "I only did what anyone should have done," Eleanor replied, echoing the simple truth that had guided her throughout. "But not what everyone would have done," Landry countered, "and therein lies the difference that changes worlds." In the days that followed, the story of Whispering Pines Ranch and the Lakota Triplets spread throughout the territory, growing with each retelling. Some versions emphasized the danger, others the miracle of survival, still others the unprecedented ceremony of honor. But all contained the essential truth that one woman's courage in a killing storm had briefly bridged worlds typically divided by fear and misunderstanding. The following spring, as wildflowers painted the prairie in brilliant hues of purple and gold, Black Elk returned as promised. The triplets, now crawling and babbling with healthy vitality, spent a day in Eleanor's care, while their father and the ranch community shared a meal that would have been unimaginable months earlier. William, once so fragile that each breath seemed uncertain, pulled himself to standing by, grasping Eleanor's skirt, his dark eyes shining with the unmistakable light of recognition. In that moment, Eleanor understood the deeper truth that morning. Star had tried to express that some connections transcend explanation, reaching across the boundaries of blood, culture, and circumstance to remind us of our shared humanity. And as the years passed, the story of the woman who found Lakota, Triplets, in a blizzard became more than frontier legend. It remained as testament to what becomes possible when compassion overcomes fear, and when the circle of honor extends beyond the limitations of its time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.